We are pleased to be joined by Ian Bremmer, who is the president of the Eurasia Group and also host of GZero World with Ian Bremmer. Good to see you, Ian.
Glad to be with you, sir.
You can, by the way, for those of you who are fans of public broadcasting, not only do you see us, but more importantly, you can check out Ian and his team Saturday mornings at 10:30 on WNET and also all around the country on public broadcasting, and which is a big deal to be able to have that audience. Describe for folks what the mission of the broadcast is.
It's really to try to bring the world to viewers and make them 10% less crazy. You know what it's like when people are watching cable news and they're digesting social media, and the politics are so fractured, they're so polarized. And I will tell you that even though I spend my life trying to understand politics, I'm not remotely political. And I like to believe that if we bring a little bit of humor and also we bring authenticity, you can talk to the entire political spectrum. And it's particularly true because the United States is such a narrow slice of the rest of the world. And when you show people just how different perspectives are outside the United States, it helps show us that our differences really are a little bit less nerve-wracking, less rage-inducing. So I think that all that is helpful.
You know, it's interesting. You and I were talking right before you got on the air, and your series, GZero World, not only started out on WNET, but now is across the country on PBS. But Neil Shapiro, our president, and also Steven Seagal are key players with the creative news group at WNET. They saw something that they've often told us with our production company, is that intelligent, important, engaging conversation more important than ever before, particularly in the age of COVID-19, Ian?
Sure, because I think even educated people, well-educated people in this environment would be excused for not knowing when and how they should wear a mask, would be excused for not knowing whether or not the United States was getting all this wrong, and if so, who, would be excused for not even knowing when we eventually have a vaccine, whether or not they should actually be an early taker of that vaccine, or they should wait. We know very little still about this virus, and much of what we know has been contradicted, not just politically, but also by the same actors frequently. And so, when you have that, you really need to cut through the noise. And I understand that a lot of people would just they'd shrug their shoulders, they'd throw up their hands, and they'd say, enough already. Let me just, have a beer with my friends and stop with the lunacy. And so I think that if you have a trusted person, a trusted institution, that maybe we get it wrong, but that we're going to tell you what we really think. We're going to be honest with you. We're not trying to sell you a line. We don't
have a horse in this race.
A political agenda. It's so important.
And I'm sorry for interrupting, but something you just said about a political agenda. Often people will say to me, oh, the media, the whole fake news thing, enemy of the people, which I don't have a lot of tolerance for because we're just doing our best, making mistakes, as you said. But you don't have an agenda. We don't have an agenda other than informing. How dare we? The idea of politicizing a mass, politicizing this COVID-19 crisis, forget about just in the United States, but around the world. Are we unique in that way, that it's so politicized as opposed to a public health global pandemic that we're all in together? We're not
unique. Certainly we've seen a lot of this in Brazil, which is the largest economy in South America. In fact, I'd argue that they've politically mishandled this worse than the United States. We've seen some of it in the United Kingdom and other countries. But I'll tell you the other side of this, which is a much more optimistic message. And that is, if you want to understand the leaders, the countries, the governments that have so far done a good job around coronavirus, really served their citizens well. It's not about rich versus poor countries. It's not about democratic versus authoritarian. It's not about small versus big. All of the countries that have done a good job across all of those characteristics, you find leaders that got in front of it early. They led with science and expertise. It was not cheerleading. and it was bringing the country together ahead of politics. And in most cases, there weren't elections coming up soon, which also really matters, right? So you can look at countries as diverse as Vietnam, South Korea, Germany, New Zealand, Norway, Greece, I mean, Uruguay, radically different countries, but they all have this in common. And it really has made a difference in getting their people back to something that feels like normalcy.
When you cover the 2020 election, analyzing, making sense of it, will any of the focus be on the role of other countries having an interest in, to say the least, if not potentially impacting that election?
You know, sure, it's a factor. It was a factor in 2016. You know, we knew that the Russians were intervening. They were spending some money at the margins. They were engaging in promotion of propaganda and fake news to make us angrier, to divide us more. And, you know, we didn't respond well. President Obama, assuming that Hillary was going to win and not getting support from Republicans in Senate, said, I'm not going to deal with it. In retrospect, a mistake. President Trump certainly isn't planning on dealing with it. He doesn't have a problem with it. And if it happens, he thinks it's largely probably going to benefit him more than Biden. But I don't think, if you ask me what are the problems with a quote unquote rigged or unfair or unfree US election, the issue is not Russia. The issue is not China or Iran or North Korea. The issue is us. You know, the Russians tried the same thing in Germany in terms of promoting all this fake information. And it didn't get anywhere in the German elections because the German people weren't having it. Because the German people weren't so divided, because they were focusing on a much more real political conversation. I think what we need to do in the United States is get our own house in order. The reason the Russians had any influence at all is because we let them. You know, because we had so many people that were ready to believe the worst, that were so angry, that believed that the system had taken advantage, and that our establishment on the left and the right were taking advantage of their fellow country members. The more important thing is not the fact that Trump is president, it's how do we get to the point that 40% of the population would support someone like that? Something like that's been happening for decades, and we need to take responsibility for that reality.
On that note, I just want to remind folks that if you're looking for a meaningful, substantive analysis, trying to make sense of a chaotic world that we're living in, check out Ian and his colleagues every Saturday on WNET at 10:30 a.m. And also across the country. And by the way, the website has been up for the entire program, so people can check it out. Ian Bremmer, the president of the Eurasia Group, and also the host of GZero World with Ian Bremmer and a great team of journalists. I want to thank you so much for joining us, Ian.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ian. I'm Steve Adubato. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the CAUCUS Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by Investors Bank, PSE&G, United Airlines, Johnson & Johnson, the Healthcare Foundation of New Jersey, the Turrell Fund, supporting Right from the Start NJ, the Russell Berry Foundation, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, and by the Adler Aphasia Center. Promotional support provided by Meadowlands Chamber, and by NorthJersey.com and Local IQ, part of the USA Today network.
Hi, I'm Cecilia Zalkin. It costs much more to care for an infant than for an older child, and many New Jersey child care centers don't have the funding they need. Because of this, many children in New Jersey don't have their basic needs met. Right from the Start NJ is dedicated to supporting this vulnerable population, children from birth to age 3. We know that the early years are the most critical, and we believe that every child deserves a bright beginning and a healthy future.